But at the end of the day, like Jesse, it's those mentoring opportunities. And whether it's within the organization or without, and whether it comes to you or you have to seek it out, it's critical to any leadership development.
Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, Where God is at Work, a podcast that sits at the intersection of missions theory and practice. We're walking at our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauley, missions leader serving in Rome, and we're back with Alessandro Di Leonardo, our church planter in Cisterna di Latina, and Jen Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. Welcome back, Alessandro.
Good to be back.
How's everyone doing?
Good. The sun is out.
Yes.
Yeah, the weather change is so good for my mood.
When I walk Sophia to school, the conversation when we talk about what we're going to pray for is always either we're going to thank God for the rain that cleans the streets of Rome, or we're going to thank Him for the sun and the beautiful day we're having. But yes, it is nice that the spring is here.
Yeah. And David took me to a concert last night. I love living in a city where there's always some cultural things going on. And there's this classical guitarist that he follows online who was playing with a quartet here in Lyon last night. So it was extra fun to get to go out. And she was amazing. And we got to walk, like we live right in the middle of the city, and we were talking about how great it is. We walk out of our apartment, we walk to a restaurant for dinner, we walk to the concert hall, we walk home afterwards at 10:30 at night. And what a privilege to live in a city in the springtime and to have access to that kind of culture, and it was lovely.
That is awesome. That is really cool. Yeah, we've had a different, similar, I think, offline we were talking about how busy the season is preparing for summer. And yes, we have been in that thick of that too. So we've been going back to back. Yesterday we were babysitting for our teammates so they could have a spiritual retreat day. And then we were also trying to get a newsletter in during that time. And then we had a prayer call right after that, after the kids went to bed. And it's like we hit send on the newsletter right as we were connecting to the prayer call. It was just, everything was just lining up right back to back. So it's been
I read it. I read the newsletter. Good newsletter.
Oh, you did? Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. So, yeah. Well, today we are going to wrap up our conversation on field leadership. If you haven't had a chance, please go back and listen to our episode on field leadership by the books, where we talk about kind of theory and, what we can learn about that from the Bible. And then we had a great interview with Steve. We'll probably reference our interview with Steve quite a bit in our conversation today, but we want to talk about tips, tools, resources that could be helpful for field leaders. And when we talk about field leaders, we're just talking about people who are involved in leadership, management, supervisory roles of missionaries and pastors on the field. And sometimes that's over a region, sometimes that's over just one specific country, sometimes it's over just one specific city too, depending on how the structures are in place. But at the end of the day, we were talking about how leadership in general, there's principles that apply no matter where you're at. So if you're, coaching a sports team, there's leadership principles that apply there that are similar to leading missionaries, that are similar to a business owner who's managing and running a business. Although I like to joke and say that leading missionaries is like herding cats, because we all kind of tend to have these independent maverick personalities, or at least at one point in time, that was kind of the stereotype of missionaries.
So pastors lead sheep and field leaders lead cats. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. I actually found a great GIF too, where you see the person trying to put the cats all in a row, and every time they move, like one of the cats, another cat goes out of the line up, and it's kind of fun.
Well, here's a quick question regarding names, because I noticed when Steve was referring to being a field leader, he was using a different terminology, and I'm sure you guys, having both been and are field leaders, you've heard it all, different names, and so maybe that could be good for some people thinking like, well, I'm not a field leader, but I'm this, and it could be like, oh no, that's exactly what a field leader is.
Yeah, he talked about entaties, which they're basically when a mission has like its association also in that country. They might have like a entity leader or director, I think is what he used too, and so that could be one thing. He himself serves as the regional director over West Africa. So he has like 14 different country, or I think it was 14 or 11 different country leaders that are reporting to him. So those are a couple things. I don't know, Jen, do you have some other
No, I
roles
think
that might
that's
get
it.
called?
And maybe some are called area leaders and some are called, regional directors or whatever. But I think you summed it up well, Jesse, at the beginning when you said we're talking about people who provide oversight, direction, leadership for missionaries in whatever capacity. So if you're leading a team of missionaries in any way, anywhere in the world, we would hope that the content in these episodes is applicable to you.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted us to tease out a little bit more, that it's a tip, I think, is the mindset of considering that you're leading in the middle. You know, Steve referred to the book Team of Teams, just that idea that we are kind of representing an organization to those who are reporting to us, but we're also representing those who are reporting to us to the organization. And so I don't know, Jen, you want to kind of help us think through how that should shape and be thought through as a leader?
Well, I thought it was so interesting and actually challenging in a good way for me how Steve highlighted that the role of the field leader is to advocate for the organization, because I tended and can tend to look at it the other way around. I know my team members, I know what they're trying to do on the field, I understand their passion, and I often understood my role as wanting to advocate for them to the organization. And he was saying, really, our role is, if we're with this organization, how are we communicating and supporting and equipping our missionaries to be working within that context and understanding those principles and all of that. So that was good and challenging. I can see value in both. And I think that's what we're talking about when we're saying leading from the middle, is being able to be willing to uphold organizational standards. I think we absolutely have to be able to do that. I think the organization has to be clear about these are the expectations for every missionary within our organization. And as field leaders, we have to be able to hold people to those sort of unchanging requirements. And I also think we're these guardians of the individuals who are called, each have a vision and a passion that God's laid on their heart and giftings that are unique to them. And we want to see them flourishing in the space that God's called them. It's interesting because, field leaderships are often managing conflict. And I recently was teaching on conflict and talking about sort of these two axes that any conflict resolution is going to fall in. And if you could look at the vertical axis as what is the strength of my conviction on this issue? It's the places we can't compromise. Like if there are certain organizational requirements for people, whether it be the amount of funding they have or certain ethical behaviors or standards, like this vertical axis is how much do we have to hold to that? And how important is that? And the higher you go on that axis, the stronger you have to hold. The x-axis, the horizontal axis, is how important is the relationship, and is this an opportunity for mercy or for grace? And is there a place where we can accommodate? And the truth is, in Scripture, we see all of the possible spectrum of responses to conflict in there, except avoidance. So the very bottom corner would be avoidance. We're just not going to deal with the conflict. That's not biblical. But we see accommodation in Scripture. When Paul says, why not rather be wronged? Don't sue your neighbor. When Jesus says, turn the other cheek, like sometimes you just go the extra mile. That's accommodating. And there are places, I think, in every issue, whether I remember when we came on the field, there were some educational requirements that weren't working for our kids. And we found something that worked, and our organization accommodated that. And it didn't fall within the bounds of what they recommended or what they wanted to see, but neither did the fact that we moved to the field with teenagers. And so that was a place where, rather than hold to their strict, what they really liked to see in terms of education for kids, they accommodated our family. But then there's other things where you have to say, look, you need to have this money in your support account. or you need to go back and raise it, because the reality is you're going to need to eat, and you need these things, and you have to uphold certain standards, and it has nothing to do with how much you love the person or how valuable their ministry is. You have to say this. And then, there's places in the Bible where we see that, where we see, Paul say, I confronted Peter to his face and said, no, you can't treat the Gentiles like this. You have to eat with them. And he's very strong on it. He's like, no, the strength of my conviction here doesn't give any room for compromise. But then there's places where we compromise, like when Paul and Silas couldn't agree about Mark, the mission went forward, and the compromise was they separated, and Silas took John Mark with him, and Paul didn't. And that was a compromise. And then there's places where we collaborate and we come up with a whole new system, like they did when they needed to. There was, the disagreement about the resources for the widows. So anyways, all of this to say, a lot of field leadership is conflict management, and that negotiating that middle, that leading from the middle of, I see that middle as being, with the organizational requirements and expectations and vision being, that vertical axis, and then that relational piece and understanding the needs of individuals as that horizontal axis, and trying to figure out, as we're negotiating the challenges and the difficulties on the field, where's the right place to land in each given situation.
Yeah, that's really good, Jen. Just to correct, it was Barnabas, not Silas.
Thank you.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
it was.
To me, especially since I'm not a field leader, but also like we said at the beginning, a lot of these things overlap with being a church planter, any type of leader. Just wondering, like, where do I get these resources to kind of land on that middle aspect? Am I doing too much? Am I not asking? Is my organization doing wrong for asking these things? And so what are some of the things that we have to kind of consider, is like, what can people know if they are in the right lane? And so to me, one of the things that has been helpful, even though I'm not a field leader, is just, comparing is not always good. But when you compare with brothers and sisters in Christ, when you're a part of a network and you talk and you kind of are able to see what's healthy on the other side, it helps me a lot. And I'm sure that could be very helpful for field leaders to be able to meet other field leaders outside of their network, to be able to, outside of their actual organization, to be able to kind of see the differences and how they can help each other.
Yeah, I think community and leading in community is so important. I think what you're saying there, Alessandra, I think it came up also in I believe it was our member care episode and interview, where we just kept realizing that community is just so important. And when we have a posture, well, anybody should have this, but definitely leaders should have a posture of curiosity. And when we lack curiosity and we have an idea that we already know it, whether we do or not, but we feel like we need to portray that for some reason, we feel like we have to come across overly confident. We do need to some extent be confident in what we're doing. But there should be a level of curiosity. I think when we have some curiosity, that will drive us to say, hey, what am I doing? Who could I reach out to and run this by them and see how they would do it? Or who might I spend some time with? That idea of proximity with someone and just seeing how they handle different things helps. One of the things I learned and appreciated from one of the leaders, he's my peer as far as age goes, but I've appreciated seeing him bring people that he was leading to different conferences, to different meetings. And they might say something, they might not say anything at all, but he was modeling for them, like, this is the things that that as an organization we're working on. He kind of, in a sense, pulled back the curtain so you could see what's going on behind the scenes with leadership and stuff. And I thought that was so important, because now they can appreciate more the decisions that are being made, the conversations happening as you're trying to figure out, what direction to lead the organization. And likewise, the same as you're saying, Alessandro, looking outside of your context. So maybe it's a network like you were referring to. Maybe it's a podcast like we're doing here or others. But yeah, that idea of curiosity and going and searching out others who have similar roles to you and what can you learn from them.
That's a little bit what Steve was referring to again in that book, Team of Teams, which is written by General Stanley McChrystal, who was talking about the big changes that happened after 9/11 and how they really had to move from an idea of efficiency to adaptability. And being able to be networked was a big part of that. And being able to be connected is a big part of that. And with people on my field, often, yes, they were on my mission organization team, and they were serving with a local church denomination or a local organization that does student ministries or whatever. So they're on my team and they're on someone else's team. And that's the way of the world right now, and that's the way of missions. And we can either see that as a strength and a value added and a way to be really connected and networking for the sake of the kingdom and for the mission, or we can see those as competitive threats. And I think we have to look at it as team of teams, as we are a team of teams, and there's multiple teams, and many of us are participants and actors within different teams. And using that, like you guys are talking about, to our advantage, to be networked, to understand, oh, this is how this works over here. That could help me over there. And this is what they're learning and doing over here. And that applies to what I'm learning and doing over there. So I think, that connectedness is really key.
Yeah, the other thing, too, with all of this is there's lots of material out there for different types of leaderships. Like, it feels like people write things based off of their whatever they're working on. If you're in the tech industry, you might have a tech leadership or CEO leadership book, or there's lots of stuff out there. But the reality is, and we talked a little bit about this with Steve, like, you might start your journey in the mission field as being called to serve a certain people group or a certain type of ministry, and you feel that call, you raise your support, and you go wherever that is. And then next thing you know, whoever you were reporting to gets fired, retires, steps down, passes away. Who knows what could be the reason that now there's a gap in leadership. And so you're the young, up-and-coming person who has a lot of things to say and opinions, so you get plucked into that leadership role. So that idea of reluctant leader, that idea of just being sucked into a gap and filling a gap is also part of leadership, which then means how do you get prepared? What kind of preparation? Because you don't really go to Bible college or university. I mean, now they do have leadership tracks and stuff, but I don't know anybody who went to school to become for leadership and then is now in a leadership role. Most of the people I've heard of are in a leadership role, and then they say, oh, maybe I could go to school and study some more things on how to become a leader. So that's the other question that we should pose is, how can people either better prepare themselves for becoming leaders, or once they're leaders, how can they, do the homework of figuring it out?
That's funny you bring that up, because being that you guys are both field leaders, I was exactly thinking, how did you guys get to that position? What kind of training did you guys do? So why don't you answer your own question, Jesse? And Jen, feel free to chime in on this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a little bit of a unique situation, because, I mean, everyone's situation is unique, but there just happened to be a worldwide pandemic that broke out the same year that we decided that I would step into a leadership role. And mine wasn't a complete gap. We had a field leader, but she was in the process of moving back stateside and semi-retirement and such. And so it just became more obvious that we needed someone on the ground to lead the team that was on the ground. And we had, long story short, we had our first kind of leadership meetings. I was invited to as a co-leader at that point, and we were kicking off after that leadership meeting with a retreat to talk to the whole team about, okay, this is what we're doing. Jesse is stepping into a co-leader role, yada, yada, yada. And like a month after that retreat, everything got shut down. There was no way to travel back and forth for her from the States to Italy. And so it just became kind of like an interesting way to do this, because basically I was stuck at home. And so my regional leader at the time just said, okay, we're going to put up a plan for the next year on things you need to learn, things you need to figure out as a leader, and we're going to just slowly work through them. And so we were meeting sometimes twice a week virtually on Zoom for an hour or so, because we just had all this time. All of a sudden we're stuck at home. We can't do things. And so it was a unique period where she just really coached me and guided me. And I only had one missionary to lead on the ground at that point because the other missionaries had gone back to the States for other reasons and gotten stuck there during the pandemic. And so we were in this season of just really a mentorship and a coaching, I would say, where we read books together, we talked through them. And at that point, it was a lot of hypothetical situations because everything was shut down. But it did prepare me well to think through things a little bit ahead of time. And so then as stuff has developed, I haven't been so caught off guard. I still have, a leader that I report to and I, brainstorm and ask for advice from on how to handle the real-time situations. But it is nice to be able to fall back on some of the preparation I had. So mine was kind of an on-the-job coaching / training with the person who was above me, who I reported to.
That's great. I just to ask, why would they chose you? Just kind of when we heard Steve's story, I would love to hear why they chose you. I mean, you said there was only two of you, but
well, first of all, I was not a reluctant leader. So I had aspirations of at one point in time being part of leadership, because having been saved and growing up in the context of a missionary church plant that was happening, I kind of saw things that I was like, oh, I think I could do that a little bit better and a little bit different. And so I was looking for a mission organization where there was that opportunity of growth into leadership. And so that was one thing. So I wasn't reluctant. I actually had put my hand up as, hey, I would step into that if when it comes up. And then there were 5 missionaries on the field at the time, including myself. And everyone unanimously said we would like Jesse to step into that role. So I didn't really have anyone else that was saying, like, there was no competition, I guess, for the role, so to speak. Everyone was kind of like, if he'll take that headache, we'll give it to him. So
I really appreciate that you said that you weren't a reluctant leader, Jesse, because I think those of us that do have a natural leadership bent, it can sometimes feel awkward to say, oh, I'll lead. I'm happy to do it. And I don't know, and especially in Christian context, it can make me, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm coming off as prideful or bossy or I don't know what, controlling. And I really actually am none of those things, but I am happy to lead and I'm comfortable in a leadership seat. I'm also comfortable following. But I appreciate that you say that, because I think sometimes I have felt like I have to put on the persona of the reluctant leader to appear appropriate in Christian contexts versus saying, I'm happy to do it. And I think that that's an important thing. I think Steve talked a little bit about this too, about self-knowledge, knowing yourself, knowing what your capacities are and what gifts you bring to the table. And if leadership is one of those, it's okay to own that and to not be shy about it. That being said, there's always growth and development opportunities. There's always so much to learn. So even if I have a natural bent, I also have an insatiable curiosity to grow and to learn more. So reading, Alessandra, I'm a self-feeder, reader, learner. In terms of leadership, I'm curious about how it works in different scenarios and different cultures. I study leaders both like in real time, watching and evaluating and what did they do there. And I also am very attentive to my own leadership as I go. Like, okay, wait a minute. This person wants to go this way and I want to go this way. What's going on? Is this a battle of wills? Do I have a strategic reason that I want to go this way? Can I support this with, a values judgment or whatever? And being curious even about my own style and process helps me to grow and develop a ton as a leader. But at the end of the day, like Jesse, it's those mentoring opportunities. And whether it's within the organization or without, and whether it comes to you or you have to seek it out, it's critical to any leadership development. So I have, as I moved into my new role at Mission Nexus, there were 2 women leaders who were leading at higher levels than I've ever led at that I reached out to and said, hey, I'm moving into this transition. It's an expansion of my leadership platform. And I would really love to have someone to talk through some leadership challenges with and to help me move into this space. Both of them have been so insightful. I met with one yesterday She challenges me. There's some things I need to work on. She encourages me. There's some things that are going well. And I don't know how you grow as a leader if you don't have someone holding up a mirror and then helping you figure out what your next steps are.
Yeah, that's good. I think what I'm getting at is mentorship, discipleship. Sounds like biblical stuff. I like that. Outside of the Bible, for me, something that's been helpful as far as growing as a leader or how to lead. There's all these personality tests, and honestly, I've taken them all. And my wife loves them, and she actually puts them into practice. Like, oh, you're this, you're this. I always forget what I am, and all that stuff. There is one that they made really simple, and I really like, and it's Working Genius. It's by Patrick Lencioni. And there's only 6 types. It's very hard to forget them. And so that's one I recommend. And it's really more geared towards how you operate, how you work. It's called Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni. So I recommend that one.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of good Lencioni resources out there. And like I would say all these different resources that we can recommend, books we can recommend, they all have to be contextualized to where you're at, and the organization you're a part of, your team dynamics. Are they multicultural teams? But there's something I think that just needs to be stated over and over again is there's nothing that can replace the conversation you can have with another leader. I just think of it, even our interviews that we've done, like we each, I think I can speak for all 3 of us, have learned different things from each interview we've done. And that's because we had a conversation with that person and something with how they shared or what they said just stuck because you're in that rapport building time of talking to each other. And so, which brings me to maybe kind of one of our last things that we want to talk about is just how do we support, how can field leaders be supported while they're doing their work for long-term success, or we always want things to be bigger and longer, and sometimes maybe they're not going to be big and long. So whatever the term is that God has determined for their leadership, what are some ways that they could be supported well?
I think we have to encourage missionaries to be attentive to their own limits and boundaries, to know clearly what are my job requirements, what do I need to do, and what actually does that mean I don't need to do, and I need to say no to. And to even encourage them to be respectful of their boundaries in terms of, their Sabbath, their day off, to communicate with their field. Look, I'm not going to answer emails on the weekend. So just know that if you need something from me, here's the emergency protocol if it is on those hours, but otherwise I'll get to it on, in my work hours, and to set up that expectation, because I think you can set up the expectation that you're available 24/7, and then you will be taken advantage of 24/7, and then you will burn out, and then you will not, there's no care in the world that's going to be able to help you because you have put yourself in a position of complete exhaustion and vulnerability. So I would say, know your limits, communicate your limits, and find, and the resources out there for that. I mean, one, there's biblical resources about Sabbath and rest. There's a lot of resources out there that talk about how we can make sure we're living in healthy rhythms.
I would add validation helps a lot, right? Because you're kind of like leading and you're not sure if you're doing it right. So to have people really speak into what you're doing, and I would say even physically coming over and seeing what you're doing and validating the work that you're doing, whether good or bad, because you're kind of like, you keep going. I'm like, wait, am I going the right road? Am I really leading us in the right place? And so whenever I've had people come over from the States, people that oversee me, it's very refreshing when they see the work and they say, oh, now we understand why this, or wait, maybe you should be doing this way. And we have a conversation. But to me, that's not micromanaging, but once in a while to be able to come and validate and help and see the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's great. Like feedback, basically, getting feedback from outside observers. I think that's great. We actually had he's no longer with our organization, but he was in a leadership role, and he was here for like 3 days doing some trainings and stuff. But along those 3 days, unbeknownst to me, he had just taken time to have a meal or talk with different missionaries. And I was driving him to the airport, and he just really encouraged me. And he said, "Hey, you're doing a really good job at caring for your people." All the conversations I had, I could just see. And so that was helpful for me because, yeah, it gave me this idea of, okay, I'm doing the right thing. Like, they feel cared for, because they might not say it to you. But also, I've done the hard conversation of just asking for direct feedback from people and saying, "Hey, what could I do better to help lead you?" And yeah, it's been interesting. Sometimes I've had some responses that were harder to hear, but yeah, that feedback loop is really good. This is an extremely practical thing, but I'm kind of nerding out about it right now because I've been jealous of other leaders who have these, and then now that I had the conversation with Steve offline, actually after our recording, he just confirmed for me that how helpful it is this idea of executive assistance or administrative as support or assistance. I think if organizations can help their leaders with that in any way possible, whether it's funding it, whether it's helping find the right people for it, training the right people for it, I just think that can be, or just giving their leaders the freedom to do it on their own, however they need to. I've just found that to be really helpful. More leaders I talk to say their scheduling and their calendar and stuff, when it's handled by their administrative assistants, makes their life a lot easier. It frees them up for what they do well, which is usually visionary, usually relational stuff, and less of that work. And some of the executive assistants I've talked to recently, they love what they do. They don't view it as like, oh, I'm in some subordinate secondary position. Like, they love being able to serve God's kingdom in that role, and they see their value. The ones I've talked to, maybe there's some that don't, but the ones I've talked to really see their value. And so I've actually been doing a lot of podcast listening on almost none of them are faith-based. Most of them are just from the secular world, but just how can you sharpen your relationship between the executive and the executive assistant, things like that, because I'm hopeful that we will soon get an admin person to help me with the different things that I'm leading. And I just think that is something, when we realize that our leaders also have strengths and weaknesses, and we let them play to their strengths, and we find someone who has a strength where they're weak and can play to that, we avoid burnout, like Jen was saying. We avoid some of the problems that we face, and we set leaders up for success by doing that. Well, this has been Field Leadership, and I'm sure many more things we could say. We really want to encourage all those who are listening to invest in their leadership skills. So whether it's reading books, podcasts, conversations you can have with other people. Maybe you don't find yourself in the leadership role, but you know someone who's in a leadership role. Think through how you can encourage them, affirm them in developing these skills. Maybe even supplying space for them to be able to develop those skills. I heard of one person who said they actually had some connections with some really important leaders that had a lot of success. And so they just did that kind of middle person introduction to connect them so that they could pick their brains and get some coaching or counsel from them. So think of how you might encourage leaders to invest in those skills. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We really hope that you view your time with us as an investment into your work. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you giving us your ears to listen to this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your friends. And until next time, keep going wherever Jesus leads.